Welcome to Straight Up Dog Talk. I'm Em, and we are back again this week with another amazing guest. This week we have Michael Shikashio, who is the aggressive dog master. How are you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing well, Em. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm real excited to get into this conversation with you today. We have a lot of people who don't understand dog body language, dog behavior, especially when it comes to aggression. A lot of dog owners think that behaviors kind of just come out of nowhere. And one of the big things is just educating on how to interpret your dog's behavior and understand what the signs are, because a lot of people get a dog based on what they see on social media. They see this really beautiful Belgian Malinois or a Cane Corso, or they get a herding breed, and now they have this chaos in their home that they just don't understand. And sometimes it gets interpreted as aggression when it's not aggression. It's just behavior and genetics. And other times it actually is aggression. So I wanted to have you come on here today and talk a little bit about those things and actual signs of aggression and how to mitigate that.
Yeah, I think a good place to start is just defining what aggression is, because that in itself has all kinds of different meanings and labels depending on who you ask. So when I think about aggression, or that term aggressive dog, which I actually don't like to use because it labels the dog into a particular category that could be problematic for them in the future, or even in the current state of how they're being treated or looked at by others. I look at aggression as behavior. The behaviors a dog or a person or a mammal might use to increase distance from or eliminate a threatening stimulus, something that they find is threatening their safety or causing fear, threatening their resources or causing them pain. They just want the thing to go away, right? That's the function of that behavior. So those behaviors could include biting, barking, lunging, growling, snarling, snapping, typical things we might think of as aggression. But really, it's normal behavior. And I think that's the most important part to stress to the world, is that aggression is normal behavior used by mammals to survive. So it wouldn't make sense for us not to have some aggression, because we wouldn't survive long. Just like if a person's like, yeah, please take my stuff. Please, yeah, oh, you've got a gun? Great. Pointed at me, right? Instead of actually doing something about it, right? It's really important to understand that it is normal for a dog to respond to something that is going to make them feel unsafe. Where I start in this conversation is just defining what aggression is. That way, when we see it, it isn't such a surprise. We go back to understanding why the dog displayed aggressive behavior. So we could probably dive into that in the conversation too, as the causes. But yeah, so I think I kind of answered your question, but I know there's a lot more to it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that we assign words and labels to dogs based on our human experience, not on the dog's actual experience, because how dogs think and how dogs live and how dogs react in situations is different because they're dogs. Their hierarchy of emotions and thought process is completely different than ours is, and they don't understand certain things. And so I like that you don't like using aggressive dog as a definition or a stereotype for them, because it can be harmful, especially in states where they have really harsh laws after a dog has been labeled an aggressive dog. We had an episode earlier this year where in Pennsylvania, if your dog is labeled an aggressive dog, you have to pay $1,000 every year when you have your dog license renewed, because your dog is considered a dangerous dog. So that can be very harmful and expensive for people if that's interpreted a certain way by where you live. The words are really important, and how we go forward in this conversation is going to be showing people that we can prevent these things, we can identify these things, but we need to be careful when we're having these conversations, because it can lead to bad things, including behavioral euthanasia.
Yeah, because one of the things that often doesn't get talked about enough is what people resort to when they have, quote unquote, an aggressive dog. Now, again, I understand the label, and it's actually my company name, aggressive dog. But that's what people are searching for when they're looking for help. So I understand the label, but I would rather it be called something like my dog is having a hard time behavior rather than aggressive behavior, because that's really what is happening, is the dog's having a hard time. And then the thing that people don't often mention is when people resort to punishment, because the word itself is again, it's loaded. So they think it's bad. Aggression is bad. So now I must punish it or stop it. But what that does is doesn't take into account, again, the causes, the real causes and the understanding. And when we start understanding what the dog is going through, then we can approach things much different. So the problem with the term aggression or aggressive, when we think about people, that person was being aggressive, it never sounds good, right? But what if you hear, oh, that person just punched another person in the face? They're really aggressive. But what if you start to understand, well, that person punched another person in the face because they were defending their child from somebody with a knife or something like that? Then it becomes very understandable. So the same thing has to happen for dogs. We have to understand why they're doing it. Many times they're not doing it out of ill will, malice, or anything that we think they're doing it with, or we need to meet it with punishment, because it's not a bad thing. A lot of times they're in pain, or they're fearful of something, or they're just trying to protect something that is of value to them that they need for survival. Food. For a dog that's maybe been impoverished or hasn't had access to food in a while, they growl near their food bowl. We as humans would do the exact same thing if we haven't eaten in a while and somebody comes over and tries to steal our stuff. So we need to be careful about how loaded of a term it is because of the punishment, because of how dogs are treated when we hear about aggression or aggressive behaviors, right?
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about what leads to what we consider to be aggressive behaviors. And let's start with trigger stacking, because there's a lot of words that get thrown around on social media that have become almost buzzwords, I guess I want to call them. And people don't actually understand what they mean. And trigger stacking, I think, is starting, unfortunately, to become one of those. People will say, oh, my dog is trigger stacking. And then when I say, well, what do you mean by that? It's never exactly what trigger stacking actually is. So would you mind defining that and giving an example?
I appreciate the label trigger stacking because it does help guardians or even trainers understand that their dog's getting stressors piled on top of each other. My preferred label is actually stress stacking versus trigger stacking, because that's really what's happening is a buildup of stress or arousal or frustration. Those are all, again, things I will define in just a moment, but it's like that we're thinking about the dog's point of view there. We're saying trigger stacking. And it typically means, okay, let's say it's a dog that has issues with people, mice, and other dogs. And we go for a walk, the dog sees another dog and starts barking. So there's one trigger. And the dog sees a person and starts barking at the person. That's another trigger. And then another car goes by. So there's 3 triggers in a row. So trigger stacking. But each one of those events creates stress in the dog internally. Sometimes the dog doesn't have time to come back to what's called homeostasis, or their what's called resiliency, or their ability to cope with stress is not so great. So there's a lot of fuel there. It's sort of like stacking up this fuel or stress, and which is more likely for the dog now to react to a particular stimulus because of that higher stress level. Now, you also might have higher arousal levels. Arousal is simply defined as being in the state of being awoke. It means when you wake up in the morning, you are in a state of arousal. And arousal is not a bad thing. However, when we see higher states of arousal, then it can impact how the dog makes decisions, just like people. Again, if we have 3 espressos and we're doing some sort of activity that's really energetic, it just gets us going, like a contact football game or something like that, we might get into really high states of arousal. Then we start making poor decisions, like the guy that hits us a little too hard, we start a fight with them because we're not making as good decisions. So the same thing can happen for dogs, or really, again, anything with a brain, that they make the cognitive decision skills, that prefrontal cortex starts to fry in a sense because there's too much going on from a neurochemical standpoint. And so it's difficult for that animal to make decisions. That's what we see when we see dogs out and about. So I like that people recognizing it by using that label trigger stacking, and that's fine. I think the most important part of it is just seeing when our dogs are having a hard time and getting them out of those situations so we can reduce that stress or that stack of stuff that's happening.
Yes. And I think that a lot of people, what they don't understand about trigger stacking is once the trigger stacking starts, you should abort mission, turn around, go home, let your dog cool off, help them relax, give them a bone or chew or some kind of enrichment toy, or even just sit and be quiet with them, so that they can be stressed from that situation, bring that emotional level down. Because if we can go backwards from where we are, then we have less chance of really triggering that major reactivity or bite, aggression, any kind of thing that we don't want to see. The snapping, the barking, all that kind of stuff.
We forget sometimes that our dogs need a moment just like people. If a person's having a hard time, and even with humans, we're not always good at recognizing when somebody's having a hard time, but the signals are there. And if you start to recognize the signals, like let's use something that somebody's fearful of, like public speaking. That's a fear that a lot of people have. So I've seen statements where people would rather jump off a bridge than get on a stage and do any public talk. Some people can be very nervous about it. And you can see that anxiety with them. We recognize that. So we can do the same thing for dogs. We can say, you need a moment. So that person about to go on stage, we are not going to ask them to do something else. Like, oh, here, take this dog trainer exam just before you go on stage for some high stressful type activity. Here, do this really challenging thing with this dog right before you go on stage. We're going to recognize that, hey, it looks like you need a moment. You need to take a breath. You need to get grounded here. Do the typical things we do to help people get grounded. But we need to do the same with dogs, is recognize when they are feeling stressed and remove them from the situation, but also equip them with an activity and the skills on how to do that, because not all dogs and not all people know how to do that.
And I think that that's where the confusion comes in a lot of the time, because first, they don't even know that it's happening. And then they don't know how to deal with it afterwards. Sometimes you can stop it, right? Sometimes you can stop the stack. Like I said, abort mission, go home, do the decompression, everybody calms down, and nothing bad happens. Sometimes bad things do happen. And then after that, a lot of people either don't know why it happened, and then it happens again, and then it happens again. And then finally, maybe they go to the vet or seek out a trainer or some kind of help, but they still don't really have any idea what's going on. So that's why the observation from the trainer is so important, because we are trained to look at that behavior and go, okay, let me explain what's happening here. A lot of people don't know that when the ears flick back, that is a potential sign of I'm uncomfortable, or the whale eye. A lot of people think that that's a cute thing that dogs do and that they're giving us a side eye, when often it's actually not a side eye, it's a whale eye, and the dog is saying, I don't like this. The tongue flicking, that's another really good one. Or the big licks over the top of the nose that show nervous behavior. Sometimes even the tippy tappy feet, where the dog is pacing a little bit in place, kind of like marching, or the very stiff tail, or the midline straight out tail. People don't know that. They just see their dog doing that and they're like, why is my dog doing that? And then they move on and they don't decompress the situation right then and there. And then the triggers start stacking, and then bam, we have a big explosion. I think that teaching body language is kind of the most important thing right now, especially with a lot of what's out there on social media, because you'll see these people who are kissing their dogs on the face or pulling their dogs to them, and the dog's eyes are huge and they're licking their lips, or they're rolling over on their back and the whale eye is coming out again, that real stiff body posture. And people are like, oh, look how cute my dog is being. And I'm like, that's not cute. Your poor dog is like suffering right now and you don't even realize it. So I think that's where the education piece really comes in and is really important, because people are not harming, but it's the same. It's like you said about the food. If someone came and put their hand on my plate and tried to take my pizza away from me, I would not be happy about that. Also, if I am feeling uncomfortable, I don't want someone pressing kisses into my face or forcing me to cuddle with them either. That makes me uncomfortable. It's the same thing with the having your dog look at you, the stare down thing that some people want, the eye contact. I'm sorry, but for me, if you're staring at me like that, that is uncomfortable and weird. Please don't do that. I don't want to do that to my dogs, and don't do that to me either. There's just a lot of miscommunication between we're humans and we do this, so we should do it to our dogs. But actually, our dogs are dogs, and we shouldn't do this.
Yeah. Body language for me is so important. Just like you said, the social media stuff. Because here's the issue, too, is that people will see it and then emulate it with their own dogs. Mm-hmm. And let's face it, dogs are really tolerant of the things we do as humans. They put up with a lot, and you can see it in their faces. A lot of times, like when I'm watching those videos, I'm like myself in the dog's shoes. I'm like, the dog, it's almost like they're eye rolling, like, oh, here we go again with this silly human thing. I'll just deal with it. Yeah, vast majority of dogs out there, they're going to be great. It's the several million per year that are not great that result in dog bites when people aren't recognizing the body language. So that's the issue, is that it really is, it's presenting a safety issue, because people see it. And the worst thing is somebody's 6-year-old or 10-year-old kids on TikTok just scrolling through and they see somebody like, oh, I could do that with my 120-pound Cane Corso and get away with it. Well, maybe not. And that's where the tragedy happens, is when people copy what they see and think they can.
Kid ones are the one that really, really upset me and just break my soul, because they're letting the baby mash the dog's ear and face and putting its hand in its mouth. And the dog is clearly showing, I do not like this. The body is stiffening. The eyes are getting wider. The ears are flattening out. The whole face of the dog has changed. And then everyone is, oh, laughing, cute. Look how cute this is. And then the dog bites and everyone's like, what just happened? What do you mean? What just happened? Yeah. It's so terrible. And you're right. Dogs are so tolerant. They're so tolerant. They go through so much stuff for us as people. I have a dog who's reactive. I wouldn't say that he's aggressive. I actually think he's more of a chicken. He's definitely there's conflict, I'm going to run in the other direction type of dog, which I much prefer to the aggressive dog, because I don't like conflict either. So let's run in the other direction. That's fine with me. But if he got to the right point, I know that there is a potential for a bite. And that being said, even if your dog isn't reactive and you have the most chilled out, laid back golden retriever of all dogs, that dog could still bite if provoked. Pain is a huge motivator, and I think that people don't think about that either.
For sure. It's actually the cause for aggression that I think is the most underdiagnosed out of all the types of causes out there. So actually, if you look at some of the research that's come out lately, there was a study that was done, as many as 80% of the dogs seen in a veterinary behavior practice, the underlying cause was pain. So that says a lot about possibly what we're missing, because there's plenty of cases out there. People are trying to do things and the dog's never seen a vet or hasn't seen a vet in a while to ensure there's nothing else going on. And if you look at those cases, it's often very straightforward. In the case where a dog's being touched in a certain area or being pulled off a dog bed or a couch or something, they're just trying to relax and rest their sore muscles or joints after a long day of dog daycare, whatever they've been doing, and then the person gets bitten trying to move their dog off the couch or something like that. It's such a common issue that, again, we need to be aware of, because if we don't, you're not actually helping the dog at all if you don't address the underlying pain issue. Because even if you're doing the best behavior change strategy on the planet, if we miss that, the dog's in pain, that's a big problem. And so the other issue is that it's hard to recognize when some dogs are in pain, because it's very subtle. So you'll hear those comments like, oh yeah, wait, he can't be in pain. He was at the dog park all day, or he did the hike all day long. Sure. Just like we get up in the morning, we get stretched out, we get warmed up, then we go to the gym, do what we need to do to warm up, and then we do the exercise. But then at the evening, I just turned 50, so my knees get a little sore and tired after a workout. I'm less likely to want to be having some toddlers jump on me or something. It's the same thing for dogs. It's often masked because the adrenaline kicks in during a workout, and it's going to mask the pain. It doesn't look like the dog's in pain, but then, of course, they're going to be painful moments later on. So,
well, and simple things like ear infections too, right? Like that's completely non-visual. So how would you know?
Exactly. And even if we do know, sometimes we're like, okay, let's clear that up. We get to go to the vet gets the ear drops in, all the typical stuff to take care of that otitis, whatever's happening. But you could still have the association there. So the dog's like, I don't know. Last time the junior came over and touched my ear, it really hurt. Because they're not saying, oh, it's because I have otitis. They're not diagnosing themselves. It's just the association that, hey, when this kid comes over, it could hurt. The infection could be completely cleared. It's just that negative associations there. Yeah, pain, it needs to be talked about more. Think about arthritis, too. It's one of the most undiagnosed things for dogs and cats, especially in how much that affects so many dogs and animals and people, and how painful it can be. People think it's got to be a senior dog. It can be a young dog that's experiencing that. Very common issue for dogs to get grumpy when people touch them or pet them or try to do activities with them. It could be putting a harness on them. It could be picking them up. It could be moving them out of a certain location. All of those can be common triggers for an aggressive response because the dog's in pain. Yeah, I'm glad though. I think the pain is being talked about more in our industry, which is great.
Yeah, I agree. And I do want to emphasize something you said there, the negative association. A lot of people don't realize, and that's why I want to emphasize this, is that negative associations happen with dog one time. It happens one time. And if it was a bad enough experience and there wasn't any redirect behavior, make the situation positive afterwards, that is going to stick in their heads. And every time after that, you have the potential for the negative reaction to be the negative reaction, but you also have the potential for it to escalate from there, because now they've said, okay, this happened once. Now it's happened again, and I've warned you again. And now we're seeing a lip curl, and now we hear a snarl, and now we hear a snarl, and the ears are back. The escalation part is where people don't realize that all of these things are happening because they didn't see the first domino that fell. How do we stop the rest of the dominoes from falling? Or how do I grab that domino before it hits the next domino? And again, that's where body language, I think, really comes in, because they are nonverbal. They can't say, like small children, my ear hurts, my tummy hurts, my head hurts, whatever the case is. And so by making sure that we are paying attention in those situations, or we went to the vet, we found out that it was the ear, we found out that it was arthritis, whatever, then being mindful of the dog and how they might be touchy in those situations after, to prevent that negative association. And then maybe doing some desensitization training with them to help make that a better experience going forward.
Yeah. And to add to what you were just saying too, is think about the dogs where the association at one time was significantly traumatic enough that it actually can cause post-traumatic stress in the dog. And what you'll often see is a very disproportionate, intense response to something. So it can feel like it doesn't make any sense to that person or the person observing you, like, oh my gosh, my dog's like Jekyll and Hyde, or air quotes, it happened out of the blue. But oftentimes when you look back at the history, that one time, and it can be something that we as humans don't find very scary. It could be a windy day and a garbage can falls over next to the dog. But it's so significantly scary because what causes a garbage can to just attack a dog, right? The dog's probably like, what just happened here? And if it's scary enough for some dogs, it can actually be traumatic where they're like, I'm never going out on a day again where there's those scary garbage cans. But the person doesn't recognize it, tries to drag them over there, and then they end up getting bitten by their own dog because the dog's just so panicked. So you see a disproportionate response to what we as humans would think is like, oh, that should be normal. I can just get you used to this, or just get over it kind of a mentality. We have to recognize those single event moments can be significantly impactful. The name of the game is to take our time. And again, going back to that understanding of what the dog's going through.
A lot of what I tell my clients is small things to us are big things to dogs. Something that we think is a minute detail, as simple as switching from the living room where we're practicing to switching to the kitchen. That's a big difference. The air vents blow in a different way. The scents are different. The room is oriented in a different way. There's different sounds, different smells. Like, all of the things are different, even just room to room in your house. People don't take that into account, that your living room, your dog is bam, 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 100%. They're doing so good. Everything looks great. That doesn't just mean, okay, now we can go on a walk. Think about halfway down the block from your living room, how many different things could happen. Like you said, the mailman, car, the person, the other dog, whatever it is, all those triggers happen in that little tiny distance. None of those triggers happen in your living room. That's why slowly exposing your dogs to things and practicing one area at a time and slowly upping those things. And now we're in an age of technology where I'm like, okay, before we go out and practice in the backyard, I want you to talk to your Google Home or your Alexa and find a Spotify playlist that is ambient noises for city and outdoor. And I want you to play that while we're practicing. Or the weather's nice enough, open up the window so your dog can hear those things. Those little tiny things make a huge difference. And sometimes people are like, why are we doing this? And then I'll go into much more detail about why we're doing it, but it's those little things that people just don't realize. Dogs are so much more sensitive. They hear better, they smell better, they see better, they can sense things through the hair on their body. They have so many more capabilities when it comes to their senses that we do, that they are, of course, much more sensitive than we are as humans.
Yeah. Yeah, they're paying attention to every little detail all the time, especially with what we're doing. One thing we didn't even talk about is co-regulation, emotional co-regulation between the dog and the person, and how much what the person does, or it's really more so the body language we're exhibiting, because the dogs are incredibly good at reading every little detail about everything we do, the eyebrow raise, the difference in our breathing patterns, all those things add up to conversation for the dog, because that's how they communicate with us. They learn some of the words we decide to blurt out as cues, but most of it is body language in our behavior. And so when we display certain types of behavior, body language, just like the dog, when they're feeling a certain way, we're going to do the same when we're feeling a certain way. And if that predicts a certain negative event or becomes commonplace in an environment where the dog is having a hard time, then those can become precursor cues to say, hey, I'm having a hard time here. You may not know it, but my body language says that. And so that means you got to get prepared because last time you saw me do that, something bad happened. So it becomes predictive in that environment. So I think the way to boil everything we were just talking about for the last minute here is to think about the dog has to feel safe. Anytime you change environment, you can go and try the new environment. You don't have to sweat the details at first, like what it smells like and what's the sounds and all those little details that sometimes are out of our control. But we should recognize if our dog's telling us they don't feel safe. And that again is through body language and behavior, and they're going to tell us that. But then we can problem solve it. What was it that made our dog not feel safe here? So then we can look at those little details in the environment and then make a list of saying, oh, it's probably this. And again, the dog usually tells us. They're going to definitely cue in on it, look at it. They let us know when there's whatever it is that's scary. But sometimes we have to do a little detective work. We don't know. Why is my dog showing a little sign of stress here? Is it for that particular gadget that we have plugged in somewhere or something? But those are less common, right? Usually it's pretty obvious. So safety, meaning dog should feel safe and the human should feel safe about working with their dog there. That is the first rule of thumb that'll keep you out of trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that like the little gadget that beeps, or it could be as simple as a scent in your home. Maybe there's a certain candle that you burn before company comes over, and now your dog is winding up because they know every time you burn that candle, 15 people are going to walk through the door. Again, small things make big differences to dogs. That predictive behavior is really, really important. And so setting your dog up for success in those kinds of situations obviously is going to look different in every home because the dogs are all individuals and they all need different kinds of support. But in that kind of a situation, where would you start if you were going to help somebody through a situation like that?
Give me an example so we can play off
Company's coming over, the dog barks and jumps on everybody that comes in, and then maybe nips at somebody before they have a chance to sit down.
Great example, because we can unpack this a little bit and think about, because I'm sure there's some listeners going through the exact same thing you just described them. For me, it's determining, again, what's the cause? Why is the dog having a tough time with visitors in the first place? Is it something in the home? It could be resources. Last time, Uncle Bob did something stupid and like tried to take the dog's toy away. And so now the dog doesn't trust people coming over, or maybe men that look like Uncle Bob or something like that. It could be that. It could be the dog's just fearful of people in general, so it needs time around strangers. Or it could be overtly fearful, be like, I just don't like anybody. It could be a pain issue. Maybe the dog's like, last time somebody was over, they pet me, so I didn't like it. It could be an owner guarding issue. Don't touch my person. Don't take me away from my person. It could be property. Don't come onto my territory. So we have to determine why the dog is displaying the aggression, because that's going to dictate what we're going to do next. But typically, management is the first step in all of your cases. So you have to prevent the dog from practicing the behavior, first of all, because we don't want them learning. They can bark at Uncle Bob and Uncle Bob backs away because he's being a hopefully reasonable human being at that point. So we want to prevent that. And of course, we also want to prevent stressing the dog. So we don't want to start trigger stacking the dog. We have to make sure we're preventing that. And the best way to do that is manage the environment. Some dogs, you may say, well, while we're working on this situation with a trainer, or we're working on it on ourselves, we can't have people over. We have to do it in a very structured way. And that might include, well, we can't have people inside the house, but we can start getting our dog used to people outside the home. It might be off property, might be on property with enough distance where people, Uncle Bob could be like, all right, Uncle Bob, we got to walk up and down the street now. And we're going to work with our dog here. And we're going to do some of the typical techniques we might use, like counter conditioning, or what's called the differential reinforcement strategy, where we're teaching the dog alternative behaviors to trying to kill Uncle Bob. That is often, sometimes we have to structure it in a way the dog feels safe. So again, going back to that safety, dog has to feel safe. So if the dog's going to feel safer outside, because there's much more distance, we're not working in tight spaces, which a home often has, and going at the dog's pace. Then eventually, once the dog's outside saying, okay, after a few sessions or however many it takes, the dog's like, all right, Uncle Bob's actually not a bad guy because he always predicts good things. The chicken's being given to me when Uncle Bob shows up. Then you could move inside the home. And here's another side tip too, is to have the person, the stranger, inside the home first. Let the dog see that stranger go in the home. Sit down on a couch somewhere as far away from the front door as possible. Then you enter with the dog on leash for safety. Sometimes you can use other barriers if a leash is an issue. So the dog can see the stranger in the home. But now the stranger sitting is safer. They're not standing. They're not moving. They're not talking. They're not doing these intense things. Because the hardest part for most dogs is when that person comes through that front door. Because usually there's door knocking, doorbell ringing, door opening, person coming through that tight space. So it's a hard spot. There's a lot of really intense stimuli that happen in that location. That's sort of the finish line, right? That's the deep end of the swimming pool. When somebody can knock on the door, enter the home, come in, and the dog's going to be okay with it, that's the finish line. But so sometimes people try to start there. Like, let's just give Uncle Bob some hot dogs and he can hand feed the dog. That's just way too much, too fast. It's shoving the person in the deep end of the swimming pool when they haven't even learned how to tread water. Same thing for dogs is we need to gradually teach them in the shallow end, and that's outside usually. That's the typical plan. And then, of course, depending on what the causes are, if it's pain, we have to address the underlying medical stuff, but also help the dog understand that nobody's going to touch you unless you say you want to be touched. So we teach the humans what consent looks like for the dogs. And then if it's a resource guarding issue, we might say, okay, we've got to work with this resource guarding in the home. It's a food bowl or a toy, typical resource guarding exchanges and counter conditioning. That's when you get into the details inside the home. But the first thing is the dog's got to be okay with saying, I feel safe enough for this person or people to be in here, regardless of whatever my issue is. Now, when they're in here, we can start working with the actual issue in the home too. So it's structured, and it can take some time with some dogs. It can take a long time with some dogs. But again, I always tell my clients, you're going to get there faster if we go at your dog's pace. If we try to rush it, it's going to take much longer. So yeah, it can feel like it's going to take an eternity, but it's going to actually be much faster. However, a lot of dogs, this is not an often difficult issue to fix because if you go at the dog's pace, most dogs, if they have a history of being around people, they're going to be like, okay, some people are cool. I just need to figure out that these new people are cool. Being the trainer going into the home, I can often tell if I'm able to make friends with this dog within a few minutes, or sometimes it could take a few sessions at most on the average case. I know that somebody else is going to be able to. I have to teach them what to do, of course, but that's a good sign for me. Okay, the dog's able to warm up to me in a few minutes because I have hot dogs or whatever. Great. And some clients are like, it's because you have hot dogs. Well, yeah, it is because I have hot dogs. It's still better than biting me, right? So yeah, on average, it can take 2 to 3 sessions for the dog to really trust me. And that's this average case. Some cases I've gone many months before the dog trusts me, but those are very rare cases. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have dogs within 30 seconds, they love you. Those are also sort of more on the extreme side of things. Most of the cases, and I'm sure some of the listeners now are saying, well, I'm kind of probably more of the average case. It takes a few times for my dog to invite you into their inner circle. But it's possible because most dogs, they do want to be somewhat social with people. Some dogs decide who they want to be social with, but most dogs are social. It's not a difficult problem in itself per se. It's making sure we do things appropriately so it doesn't become more difficult.
Again, each dog is individual. So remember, if you have a multi-dog household, this situation might look different. Mm-hmm. So I have one dog that literally is so happy when everyone comes over. I call him the traitor dog because mom no longer exists. There are people here and many hands to pet me. See you later. Peace out. And then I have my other dog, Fitz, who's like, I don't like any of you. Get out of my house. So I do actually kind of what you just said there is I actually take him out in the backyard and I'll play fetch with him, let him do his own thing. And then maybe he'll take a nap on the porch. And then people can come in and sit down, get ready to eat or play board games or whatever it is. And then once everybody is seated and has their drinks and all that kind of stuff, then I can let Fitz come in and he can decide I'm going to go around and sniff at these people or I'm just going to stand here and bark for a few minutes. And then eventually he gets bored of that and he goes and he lays down. And as long as nobody freaks out or tries to pet him until he says it's okay, it's usually fine. Yeah. He doesn't have an issue. But I have to set the situation up so that each dog is successful in that situation.
Yeah. And I just had this thought on top of my head. Imagine if our dogs just started inviting other dogs over at random. And they're like, all right, I've got my friends over here today. It's the same thing we're doing to our dogs, right? We're bringing random people over to them unannounced because they don't know when we have somebody coming over unless we pre-cue them, which can be worse. Imagine if they started doing something that the last time they started doing that, like fluffing up their dog beds or something for their visiting friends. And then a couple of large dogs came in and attacked us. That we're going to remember.
I'm very displeased with that situation. That was a day trying to get everybody out of there and patch the hole up in the fence. That's a lot of stress. So that's a great example, honestly. Why don't we talk a little bit about your course before we start to wrap up here? Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what you offer? I know you don't do individual training anymore. Is that that correct?
Yeah, I have quite a few people I can refer to though. If somebody does need help with a particular type of case, I have a whole bunch of people I love to refer to. So feel free to reach out if you need a referral. That's the nice thing about having a community is that aggression specialist, so to speak. Is I decided to focus on aggression many years ago as the only thing I was going to work with. But now there's people deciding they only want to work with like type of aggression, so dog aggression in the home or resource guarding or leash reactivity, all those things. Now I know specialists that's their only thing. And I find that once somebody starts focusing on one topic, they get really, really good at it. They see the nuances and they see tons of the same kind of case. So they get to really see a variety of that kind of case. And they just get so good at it. So
that's good information to have. Yeah. Listeners, remember that if you're looking for a referral, you can still reach out to Mike and ask for referrals because he can help you, especially if it's specific. I think it's important to have people who specialize in areas like that because, like you said, they do see more of it and they are more ingrained and they have more information. So I think that's really important.
We're seeing like the dog training world sort of get like the medical field where we have specialists. So you have an orthopedist that is going to take care of your bones. Imagine if you have somebody that's an orthopedist, but they only do ACL repairs or knee surgery, and that's the only thing they focus on. They're probably going to be really good at it. So I'm going to choose the doctor that does only that kind of. So yeah, the course, I have the Aggression in Dogs Master course. That's for professionals. Although I've had some dog guardians just take it because they want to help their own dog. But it is a course for professionals. So if anybody is a trainer out there, or even people working in shelter behavior or veterinary teams that work with behavior, I've had those folks come in and take the course as well. So that is a full how to work aggression cases, soup to nuts type of course. I am about to release the Dog Guardian aggression course. So I just mentioned specialists. I have Jacqueline Drake, Christina Young, Jessica Wheatcraft, and Emily Martel that are specialists in those sort of the four main issues we see is dog, human, resource guarding, and leash reactivity. They're all specialists in each one taking one of the topics. And I'm going to introduce the main theme of the course, but it's just for dog guardians. So people struggling with their own dogs, there's going to be a course out there pretty soon. That should be in the next few weeks that'll be launched. So by the time this podcast is out, a couple different options, but those are everything you're hearing about, the courses, the webinars. I have tons of free articles and videos for people to, if they're looking for resources. It's on aggressivedog.com. Again, there's that label, aggressive dog, but that's what shows up on Google searches. So aggressivedog.com, it's all there. The podcasts, the articles, the videos, the courses, tons of free resources too for people.
Which is awesome. And I will comment that I am currently about halfway through your course for professionals and I'm really enjoying it. There's been some great guest speakers so far, which has been really enjoyable. But I have learned that I am not going to be an aggressive dog specialist. I will tell you guys that flat out right now. I have personally had an aggressive dog that had to be behaviorally euthanized, and it's pretty traumatic. And I do so much appreciate all of the trigger warnings that you give in your course because it is hard, guys, to watch a dog fight. It is hard to watch a dog bite another dog or bite another person. But if you're trying to learn how to stop it, you have to watch it, no matter how hard it is. But because of that, aggression is definitely not going to be my main focus. But I do think that, like you said, there's degrees of everything. So there are certain cases that I feel like I could work, and then there are cases that I feel are definitely above my pay grade. And that would be when I would say, hey, Mike, I need somebody for this, because it's definitely not going to be my specialty. But I do think that taking your course as a professional and being able to know where my line is as a professional is really, really important. Your course, it's really been phenomenal. It's been really educational. I can't wait to finish it and have another conversation with you about it. But what was your favorite part about teaching that course, creating that course?
Well, I appreciate your nice comments about the course too. That means a lot. You know what? I think just putting it all in one place, because that's what I found when I was learning about aggression. There was some great resources when I was starting out, and this is going back almost 2 decades, but some good books, some good videos. There wasn't a ton of online learning at the time, some good discussion groups, but nothing was in one place. I was piecing everything together and trying to figure out what to do. People were talking about safety and management in one place. People were talking about different techniques and counter conditioning and things like that, but there wasn't any one place to it. So I was like, well, I love the topic, and why don't I just do it? So I started to put together, and it started with something called How to Work Aggression Cases A to Z with the Dog Trainers Connection. This was going back ooh, maybe at least 12, 13 years ago now. But so I started a smaller course with them and then developed into a much longer format, which covered some of the topics I still want to include. So case studies, bringing in other specialists like Kim Brophy talking about ethology and Dr. Chris Tockel talking about behavior meds, Jessica Dolce talking about compassion fatigue that animal professionals can face, and just bringing it all into one spot. So creating that master course. And that's kind of how the online stuff started for me. And then, of course, I branched out into bringing in other professionals and doing webinars and conferences and podcasts and you name it. So to answer your question, my favorite part is just creating a central hub for everybody who has questions about anything that has to do with aggression, putting it all one spot and creating a huge community out of it. I'm very fortunate in that regard because I've met so many great people, so many creative, intelligent, caring, kind people all over the world now too. I've traveled to, I think, around 25 different countries for the last 6 or 7 years.
Wow.
Took a little break during the pandemic, but just doing workshops in hundreds of different cities. And it's so rewarding to me to be able to do that, to spread information using kind methods to help dogs that are having a hard time themselves, and many different languages and many different cultures. And that's kind of another nice aspect too, is learning about the culture of dogs in different parts of the world, because it's much different in some ways in how local cultures and society will treat animals and approach training and behavior change, and the reasons for aggression might differ a little bit. So it's fascinating. It really is. The US is a big country, so we get stuck in our own little bubble here. We see what we see for bites and behavior and aggression, but it can be really different in some places. Just out in Switzerland, the Zurich side of Switzerland, a German-speaking side, Germany, then Denmark before that. So Denmark and Switzerland are very similar. They have some of the strongest animal welfare laws. So you don't see any aversive tools. They're banned, actually. You see the treatment of animals much different than they would in the US. It's not to say that you don't see punishment in training. It's just much less. And the behavior of dogs is, I find, fascinatingly different too. You don't see the same level of aggression there. I think it's a tolerance thing, but it's also probably has a lot to do with how they treat their animals, as well as the laws in place, tolerate very high level biters like they do in the US here. It's just that those kind of differences really make you think about the influences on dog behavior and the relationships between dogs and people and how dogs live. It goes beyond just training, right?
I completed a mentorship program under Sailor Jerry, and one of our assignments, we were each assigned a country, and everybody in the apprenticeship had to give a presentation on the country's laws. And so that was really cool because everyone gave a different country and we learned a lot. I had Norway, and Norway has this thing called Almenstraten, which is the right to roam, and it applies to dogs too. And I just thought that it was such a cool thing that they're thinking about the freedom and the rights of the dog. That's not something that we look at the same way here. So it was really interesting to see the differences. And tools are also banned in Norway. I thought it was really neat, and I'm glad that you brought that up because demographics, they do make a difference. And I think that it's another thing that people don't think about a lot. Even as far as we live in a big city and we have a big backyard, there's big changes in dog behavior there too. And like I said, things that seem little to us are big differences to dogs. But I love that your answer was to put all of the information in one place, because that is why I started this podcast. I wanted a place where people could go and be like, I need to learn about aggression, but I also want to learn a little bit about genetics. And I'd also like to have some information about different types of training, because like you said, you can Google and then you end up in this just mishmash, piecing things together, not really getting answers, or kind of like half answers or non-answers. And there's just not a lot of information. So this podcast covers everything from training, nutrition, genetics, aggression, to just basic everyday dog stuff, because I want people to be like, oh, well, I can listen to these 5 episodes and I now have 5 contacts plus the information that I've gained from these episodes. But now maybe I'm actually interested in this and this and this too. So it's just a jumping point for people. It's not a cohesive collection of information, but I think it covers a lot where you can at least get started and not feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. I feel totally overwhelmed, because I think a lot of people do. Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Well, before we wrap up, what would you like to leave the listeners with today? That's a huge one. And actually, we have a resource for that one too. We have Handlers and Humans, which is a psychiatrist who works with people who have difficult dogs and does the people side of the emotional. So there you go, guys. Find yourselves an aggressive dog specialist through Mike. If you're struggling, reach out to Handlers and Humans for the you side of it and get yourself back on track. So if you have questions, you guys can find Mike on Instagram and also at aggressivedog.com. And feel free to reach out to him at any time. And we will see you guys next week on Straight Up Dog Talk.